Welcoming everyone in.
Say you don't know me, I recognize my face. Say you don't care who goes to that kind of place. Knee deep in the hoopla.
Really great to have everyone joining us.
Too many runaways eating up the night. Marconi plays the mama. Listen to the radio. Don't you remember? We built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. We built this city on rock and roll. We built this city on rock and roll. Someone always playing corporation games. Who cares? They're always changing corporation names. We just want to dance here.
Ready to start? Welcome everyone.
They call us here.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you to folks who are joining us. We have a lot of folks coming in from the waiting room. And as we're getting folks in, we're going to go ahead and get started right on time. Welcome everybody to the 2021 federal election All Candidates Forum on Mobility and Land Use. That is a mouthful, and you're going to be hearing a lot of it today as we're getting through this forum. Thank you very much for everybody who's joining us. My name is Jude Krasta. I am the program manager for Moving in a Livable Region, an initiative of the Simon Fraser University Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue. Today, I am speaking to you from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I would like to, at this moment, thank the Vancouver Sun, our media partner, for supporting us in this event. Please note that this event is being live streamed and recorded. Portions of this recording may be rebroadcast in part or whole through our partner outlets. Due to this event being live streamed, the live streaming may take place on a third-party application and the recording may be stored where FIPA will not apply. You can check the chat function for more details about the recording and the live streaming of this event. We also have closed captioning available, and you can find more information about this in the chat, including a link to full screen live captioning. All right, I know that's a lot of information for folks as we're coming in. Thank you to everybody who is continuing to join from the waiting room. Just to give you a sense of Moving in a Livable Region, we are a growing consortium based in Metro Vancouver, operating through the SFU Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue. We aim to build a more resilient, equitable, economically strong, and healthy region, and are currently comprised of stakeholders including the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation, Transit, Metro Vancouver, provincial and municipal government representatives, environment organizations, active transportation and mobility organizations, nonprofits, boards of trade, business associations, academics and student organizations, industry, health authorities, Simon Fraser University, and the University of British Columbia. Every time we do this event every year, this intro is going to get longer as we have more stakeholders coming on board. Our stakeholders recognize that we can only move forward as a region where we work together and understand the values we each share. That's why we're holding this event, to bring you more information. We acknowledge that positive growth in this region can be achieved when we improve our mobility and land use planning processes together. As we mentioned, we are delighted to present this event to you today in partnership with the Vancouver Sun. And so now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Harold Munro, Editor-in-Chief of the Vancouver Sun, to share with us a few thoughts about today's event. Harold?
Hey, thank you, Jude, and thanks for this opportunity. So that's going back to my days as a beat reporter covering regional transportation and growth here, and around the founding of TransLink and all that time. I've considered this intersection of these topics being discussed today, certainly amongst the most critical facing the region, and it's only getting more critical as the decades go along. So I'm very pleased that the Vancouver Sun can serve as a media partner in support of this forum. And I have tremendous respect and certainly gratitude towards each of the candidates here today for standing for public office. You know, not an easy thing to do, particularly when politics have become so divisive on so many fronts. For the benefit of the audience, I would urge you all to be specific about how you'd like to address problems in this region and how you would and how you pay for these solutions, which is also important. When you got a diverse region like this with so many diverse housing needs and transportation needs, it's important not to leave anybody out, from the soccer moms and dads whose commute involves dropping kids off at work or off at daycare, heading to work, and then off at soccer practice, and transit's not necessarily the best solution to them. So if you're going to tax automobiles, what do you say to those people? If you're going to tax developers to pay for housing, subsidized housing, then what about the knock-on effect of what that does to affordability for renters and new home buyers? Because we know that those are only going to be passed on. So my thanks certainly as well to Moving in a Livable Region for organizing the event. I think the work of this consortium and its member agencies and interest groups is vital if we're going to have a region that is equitable and economically strong and healthy. And I'd also just a special thank you to Chantal Sylvester, who herself a former candidate for public office, for moderating the event. So I'm looking forward to a robust conversation, forum, debate, whatever you want to call it, and some great questions from the audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Harold. And now I would like to introduce, that was a perfect segue, to Shauna Sylvester. Shauna is the Executive Director of the SFU Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue, and is the lead convener for Moving in the Livable Region. We also are excited to have her as our moderator today for this panel. Over to you, Shauna.
Thanks so much, Jude. And wow, it's so great to be here. And I want to thank Harold. I want to thank Jude. And I want to thank Moving in a Livable Region and all the folks that are involved with that. And there are many, as Jude has said. But I especially want to thank the candidates. And I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to introduce each of our candidates. And then I'm going to go through the structure of today's forum. And I promise you it won't be like the leaders' debate so that we watched the other night. It's a little bit different. This is really about trying to promote dialogue and forum. Doesn't mean there's not debate, there will be, but we really want to hear from folks. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I know we have a master host, and I'm going to say, if you are not muted, this would be the time to mute yourself, because we can hear some people talking. So this might be a good time to mute yourself if you're not talking, just to keep us going here. Now, first of all, let me introduce our candidates, and I'm going to start with Anjali Appadurai. And Anjali is a seasoned advocate for environmental, social, and economic justice. She's also a musician and a staunch believer in people power. Anjali is passionate about exposing the way that climate change intensifies economic inequality, and she champions combining climate action with a strong social safety net. After years of advocacy at UN climate conferences with West Coast Environmental Law, the Sierra Club of BC, the Padma Center for Climate Justice, and the Climate Emergency Unit, Anjali is stepping up and running as the new Democratic candidate in the swing riding of Vancouver-Granville. Big welcome to you, Anjali. Next, we have Imtiaz Popat of Vancouver-Granville as well, but this time for the Green Party. Imtiaz Popat is a therapeutic counselor who is currently working in public health with the South Asian Health Institute, which is part of Fraser Health. Imtiaz has been a proponent for global justice and is a firm believer in the Global Greens Charter. He's a co-founder of the Coalition Against Bigotry, Pacific, and the Community-Based Anti-Hate Task Force. Imtiaz believes that ecological justice is social justice. He's organized protests against racism and bigotry and advocated for LGBT rights and animal welfare, and protested against LNG in the Site C dam. Imtiaz has also been advocating for the homeless, police reform, street safety, and better public transit, including fuel cell trams and streetcars. He's been a longtime proponent for proportional representation and has worked on many electoral reform campaigns at the local, provincial, and federal level. Welcome, Imtiaz. Josh Vandervies, our Liberal candidate from Vancouver East. Josh Vandervies is a lawyer focused on creating and defending Canadian not-for-profit organizations, charitable status, and charitable gifts. He seeks to protect the integrity of sport and the rights of athletes. Josh is dedicated to advancing inclusion, accessibility, and support in the Canadian disability community and beyond. A past Terry Fox Humanitarian Award scholar, he's spent the last 15 years making communities stronger. Josh helped dedicated leaders assemble and defend the BC Equipment and Assistive Technology Initiative and served as a member of the BC Ministers' Council on Employment and Accessibility. Fluently bilingual, Josh is a founder of the Canadian Disability Foundation, a past president of Athletes Can, and for those that don't know Athletes Can, it's Canada's Association of Olympic, Paralympic, and National Team Athletes, and is a past director of the Canadian Paralympic Committee. Josh won bronze at the London 2012 Paralympics in doubles boccia. So big welcome to you as well, Josh. Now let's just take a moment to look at the structure. And I am aided today by Jonas Osario. Jonas, if you could just wave for a moment. Jonas is our timekeeper, a critical role in this event because we are going to go through a number of different parts of this session. So we're going to begin in a few minutes, and the candidates will have 2 minutes for opening statements. Then we have our first of 3 candidate challenges. Those candidates one candidate gets to ask another candidate a question. And that candidate has 30 seconds to ask the question, and the candidate responding has 1 minute. Then we open it up for an open floor where any candidate can engage on that issue. So that's candidate challenge 1. We'll have 3 of those. Then after the first candidate challenge, it's face the public, and that's where candidates take your questions. So get ready with your questions. I'll try and follow them. We've got a team that's going to help me identify some people, and I might call on you to ask a question. Next, we'll go to candidate challenge number 2. And again, same format. Candidates get to ask each other a question. Then we have the section which is called Stand Your Ground. And that's where I ask you some deep penetrating questions about your party platform. We come to candidate challenge number 3 and then close off with your 2-minute closing. So that's our format for today. Should be fun. It'll be fast. It will be very, very fast. And I hope it will be exciting. And candidates, are you ready? Thumbs up. We're ready to go.
Yeah.
So we pulled out of a hat to get random order for your opening statements. So the first candidate, Anjali Appadurai of the NDP, will begin, followed by Imtiaz Papat and then Josh Vandervies. Over to you, Anjali, and I'm going to ask our group to spotlight you so we can see you fully.
Thank
Okay,
you so much, Shauna and Harold and everyone on the team of MLR and Vancouver Sun for hosting this. It's a real honor to be here alongside these other really amazing candidates. I am Anjali Appadurai. I am a longtime climate justice activist and social justice activist. I got my start in international climate politics and at the United Nations Climate Convention. And recently I have been working in the environmental nonprofit sector here in Vancouver. I've been a climate activist for over a decade now, and it's been a roller coaster of emotions, and it's been a really disappointing past decade to watch as we missed some really, really key targets and some key opportunities to slow down this runaway train of climate change. And after the summer of wildfire smoke and the unprecedented heat wave that took hundreds of lives, I felt that it was time for people like me to put my name forward, to become a bolder type of leadership on the climate and on related issues of unaffordability and inequality. We have a number of critical issues that we're facing in Vancouver. Top of the list are climate change and unaffordability, and my core platform is that those two things are extremely inextricably linked. Every choice, every policy decision we make in the next few years is taking place against the backdrop of climate change. And we know that climate change is exacerbated by and exacerbates inequality. And so in order to have a comprehensive way of going forward within the constraints of climate change, we need to tackle the unaffordability crisis. We've seen a lot of broken promises and a lot of incrementalism in these areas. And so I believe that in order to move forward, we need to really have equity at the heart of all our policy decisions. That's what I'm campaigning on, and that's what I really believe in. I'm so grateful to be here as the NDP candidate in Vancouver Granville. The campaign has been incredibly
Okay, thank
inspirational.
you, Angeli. Thank you so much. Time is up. You'll see, I will be keeping us to time. I want to thank you so much for that. We were having a little bit of glitch at SFU. If you see freeze, Jude Crasta is going to step in if I have to take a moment until my camera unfreezes. But Angeli, thank you so much. Imtiaz, you're up. 2 minutes. Imtiaz Popat of the Green Party, over to you. We'll get a spotlight on Imtiaz. Can you hear me, Imtiaz? I don't hear you yet speaking. Maybe you are on mute. Imtiaz.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear
Yeah.
you now.
Yeah,
Yes.
so yeah, my name is Imtiaz Popat. I'm pleased to be here. I'm the Green Party candidate for Vancouver. You can't hear me? I unmuted. I don't.
Imtiaz,
Can
you're
you hear me?
fine. You're fine. We can hear you. Yes, please continue.
No?
Imtiaz, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, so again, yes. Okay, so my name is Imtiaz Popat. I'm pleased to be here. I'm speaking to you from the unceded homelands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam. And I think it's important to say that not just in LIP, but especially with today's forum, that when we talk about land use and transportation, we have to recognize that we are on Indigenous territories and we have to work with Indigenous governments. The Tsleil-Waututh, I've actually had some good interactions with them, the Squamish and the Musqueam, because we have shared land with them. And if we make policy decisions in government, we need to interact with them and we have to have a dialogue with them in terms of how do we do land use, how do we do transportation, and how does it work for them? How is land use, housing, all these things work for them? And that should frame our policy in government. As long as I've been involved with the Green Party, we've always partnered with Indigenous people and learned a lot about what is sovereignty and what it is, the fact that we are settlers on these lands that belong to them.
I think
and
we
that
are
need
having
to
a
work
problem,
together
Imtiaz,
in
with your
collaboration.
connection. Yeah, your connection is going down, Imtiaz. So we're going to come back and hopefully we'll be able to add a little bit in your closing statement. So if want to make sure that you've got a good connection there so that we can hear you. I am going to add to your ending statement so that you have a bit more time at that point. Okay, we'll add another minute at the end, just so that you have a chance to get your.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to move now to Josh Vandervees. Josh, over to you. Your 2 minutes begin.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation today. I'm zooming in from Mount Pleasant, the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. And, thank you for that great introduction, Shauna. That stole most of my and likely my other candidates' thunder here in the opening statement, so we can move forward on the discussion a bit. But of course, I am a retired Paralympian, and those glory days are over. Most of my career was spent losing, but I finally pulled off bronze in London 2012. Now I'm just a lawyer, I like to say. I'm a charity lawyer, so I build charities and defend them when CRA revokes their status. And, across my law files, I've had serious mentors encourage me to run for politics. They told me that my demeanor and my thoughtfulness and my ability to communicate might serve me well in politics. And as I went forward as a lawyer, I wanted to go into politics less and less, but I decided to give it a chance before I gave up on the goal. And so here I am. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for the topic today. I moved to Vancouver from Ontario about 13 years ago. And one of the main reasons that I moved was because of the excellent transportation system here. So, we can always do better. And I want to do way better, but I think we should also really acknowledge that we live in one of the most excellent places in the world. And transportation and land is part of that. I see I have about 10 seconds left here, and so I'll just look forward to learning and contributing today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. Now, we've had a chance to just hear a little bit of opening statements. We're going to get in and dive right into content now. And I'm really going to encourage you to ask pithy questions. You've got, when you have a chance to ask a question, it's 30 seconds to ask, and you have 1 minute to respond. And the first two, Josh, you're going to get in candidate challenge number 1, you get to ask Anjali the first question. So let's begin with you, and a question for Anjali, please.
Thanks. Okay, Anjali. Well, watching the leaders debate, I was so frustrated and disappointed to see Mr. Singh, the NDP leader, say in the media scrum afterwards that he did not, and the NDP did not bear any of the blame for any perceived failures of the government for the past 2 years. So if that is the case, then how does the NDP have any influence in Parliament?
Can I
Over
respond?
to you, Anjali.
Okay. Thanks for your question. And I think it is a question of really having to sit by and watch as promise after promise was broken in the past 6 years of federal leadership. And I think that the role that I would play if I were to enter Parliament after this election is to be a really powerful voice to push government at all levels, to push all the parties, including my own. It's 30 seconds, right?
You had a minute, but that's okay. I'm going to open it up. Let's open this
Okay.
up in the issue. And I think the issue Josh is trying to get at is minority government, where you hold the balance. Potentially, the Bloc did in that case, but NDP had a role. So let's just open this up. And I would also invite if MTS wants to come in, but if Josh has anything to say or MTS has anything to say, we're going to give it 2 minutes. Anjali, please continue if you'd like.
No, I'll leave it at that. And I would welcome other comments from other parties.
Sure. I mean, I'll just add,
So-
I'm a fan of minority parliaments and the Westminster system. It was just so disappointing and frustrating to hear those comments, especially in my riding, Vancouver East. We have a long time NDP sitting MP. And so the big question that I have and that I'm hearing from voters is, why continue voting the same way? Why vote for an opposition voice that's not effective?
I guess
Right, I like minority governments as well. I think can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, MTS.
Yeah, minority governments are really important and they do work well, and they did work well. I was disappointed that Jagmeet Singh did not take the opportunity to block the pipeline as a condition of supporting the minority government or bringing in proportional representation. I think that's where minority governments can be very, very effective, when you have an actual stake in government. But if you're not using that well, then that's very disappointing.
Don't wait. Just come on in until the time's over. Yeah.
personally, I don't know if it's that the public cares about these small sort of moments of sort of political signaling rather than actually what has been done in Parliament and what has actually been put forward as promises and progressive policy positions. And so that's what I certainly turn my attention to when I look at what's been done over the last 6 years and what we could do with a continued minority government. I'm also very much in support of the minority government situation.
Okay. Thank you. Now that was the first time, and that never goes perfectly in terms of, because it's the first time you're actually talking to each other within the context of a theme that somebody has addressed. So we're going to do it now. MTS, you get to ask Josh Vandervies a question, and you've got 30 seconds to ask your question. So I'm going to get you to be really succinct. And then Josh, you've got a minute, and then we'll open it up for 2. Go MTS.
So Josh, so yeah, the Liberals have promises about helping the home buyers in terms of a lot of grants for home buyers and so on. What do you have for renters? What kind of grants and supports do you offer for renters?
Over to you, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So first of all, we've helped more than 2 million Canadians find homes since 2015. And that's through new builds, repairs, renovations, and also rental subsidies. The rental approach in our platform, so that was since 2015, going forward, the approach is in two prongs. So first of all, we are committing to build more than 20,000 more units of affordable rental housing, while at the same time, we're going to take a very close look at REITs, so real estate investment trusts, large corporations that have a number of property holdings that they rent out. We're going to make sure that their tax treatment is fair so that housing stays as a right for individuals and it gets out of the corporate incentive environment as much as we can.
Okay, we're going to open it up to Anjali Imtiaz.
My question is, what are you going to do? What kind of grants are available? My question is, what kind of grants are available to renters? I don't think you answered that.
Yep, so I laid out what's available.
Okay, Anjali, did you want to come in, or are there any? We can move on to the next part if you have to unmute yourselves in this section, I think makes sense.
I think I'm happy to move on to the next part.
Okay, so unless there's anything else on that round. Now, I noticed in the chat, now this next section is called Face the Public. Now, public already, if I'm looking at the chat, is saying, hey, but what about transportation? And what about the whole range of issues related to mobility? And we've been talking housing is obviously about land use planning and it's related. So I want to make it clear that each of the issues that you've raised have been very related. But I want to go to the participants now and offer an opportunity. I'm going to go to gallery view so that I can see who's out there. And if you would like to ask a question, you can either post it in the chat or you can put up your hand, and I know that others will help me identify you. So please, if you have a question, let's hear it. Go ahead, Mike Henderson.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for participating. I do have a very transportation related question. It might be a little specific, but I think it's very important to Canada. The question would be, what actions would your party likely take, or what priorities would you likely have to ensure that transportation infrastructure that's needed to facilitate international trade is actually in place in this region and in Canada more broadly? We're thinking here particularly of the transportation infrastructure required to support international trade with Asia.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much, Mike. And as you'll see, Honus is giving us a sense of, so you got, those are fast questions. Mike's asking the question of what about the transportation infrastructure to support trade? I'm going to ask Anjali to go, and then Josh and Imtiaz, and then I'll change it up with each question. But if you'd like to go, Anjali.
Sure. I would sort of pivot to sort of a more high level approach to talk about how we need transportation infrastructure, any transportation infrastructure in the next 5 to 10 years to draw its energy from renewable sources. Otherwise, it's not going to facilitate trade in a sustainable way for the livable future that we're trying to move towards. So I'll sort of leave it at that.
Hey, Imtiaz, or Josh, sorry, and then Imtiaz.
Thanks for the question. So a re-elected Liberal government has a few proposals here. First of all, we're going to build a new federal hub that allows businesses and entrepreneurs to take advantage of all the trade agreements that are out there. We're promising to launch a new comprehensive Asia Pacific strategy, and that includes negotiating new bilateral trade agreements and expanding FIPAs. And we're going to reinforce economic cooperation in our hemisphere through the Pacific Alliance. And
Josh, I'm gonna stop you there because Mike's asking the question about the transportation infrastructure to support
yeah.
that.
yeah,
That's
and
good.
so that's the overall infrastructure approach, Mike. And I appreciate the specificity of your question, and I'm going to be watching and thinking about that.
Okay, so you've given us a sense of the agreements, but not the transportation infrastructure. I'm going to hold each of you to the questions that folks are asking because I think they're important. Imtiaz. What is the transportation infrastructure that you're going to put in place? How are you going to ensure that is there for trade? Imtiaz? I think Imtiaz is having some technical difficulties because I can't hear you. Imtiaz, I'm going to also invite you to put it into the chat. We can't, now we can. If you could just.
So yeah, I think it's a good question. Thank you for the question. I think trade is really, really important, but if you, yeah, you can hear me, right? No, I think it's an important question, and I think trade is really important, especially with the Asia Pacific. In fact, Indigenous people have been trade with this coast for a long time and by the waterways. So and sea transportation is very, very important. We need to encourage that as well, and also rail transportation. We need to have a very robust rail transportation in this country. But in this West Coast, as BC Rail and Via Rail are really, we need to improve that, including transportation as well. With safety in mind, we need to keep that as well. I think water and rail transportation are very good and green transportation, but we need to have more safety, and trade is important for the region. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Imtiaz. So I want Nathan Davidowitz has asked a question, and I think it's he's said federal governments have failed on transit expenditures because they are a very small expenditure compared to what the US and the EU are putting out there. And I wonder if you can speak directly to what you as your parties are going to do around investing in transportation and particularly transit. So what are your transit plans? And this time we're going to start with Josh. We'll go to Anjali and then we'll come back to Imtiaz. And Imtiaz, I'm really hoping we can get your sound quality up there. So over to you, Josh.
Well, I always want to do more in public transit. I shared how critical it is to me and how much skin I have in the game. I use it myself all the time. The Liberals have spent 10 times the amount on public transit than Stephen Harper did. And of course, we're just getting started. This year, we invested an additional $14.9 billion, which included Canada's first public transit fund. And so what that also includes is advancing a national active transportation strategy. And we're going to make high frequency rail a reality with that funding, and bring in the acceleration of major public transit projects across the country. You know, the UBC subway extension is a real top of mind example for all of us.
Thank you, Josh. Anjali from the NDP. What's the transportation spend?
Yeah, I agree with Josh that I can't overstate how important it is to have free and accessible public transit for all, and for that to be something that's really low barrier and something that Canadians can rely upon for getting around in a car-free way. So the NDP is proposing doubling the money to support municipalities with their public transit plans in their communities from 2.2 billion to 4.4 billion by 2030. And then also in that same time period to switch all government transport, which means all transit vehicles, to electric by 2030. And along with a general commitment to modernize and expand our public transit systems, because we really do need to do that if we're going to replace sort of car-dependent communities, which is obviously related to land use as well.
Thanks, Anjali. And over to you, Imtiaz. For the Green Party, what's your commitment to the spend on transit? Are you speaking, Imtiaz? I'm not hearing anything from MTS.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, I think we need to spend way more money on I think we need to spend way more money on local transit than we are currently. We believe in free transit. That's part of my platform. And we should be not relying so much on electric energy, because that means building more Site C dams. We don't need that. There are other uses such as fuel cell technology that's being used in China and so on. Josh, my concern is that if the Liberals are spending so much money in transit, we're not seeing it over here. Right? We're not seeing the money spent on transit. We need to see more streetcars using cell fuel technology, and we need to stop our reliance on fossil fuels and also electricity.
Thank you so much, MTS. I realize there may be a delay before you hear me, MTS, and I keep wondering if maybe you should go out and come back in so that we can see if we can get a better connection there. But my colleagues will help you in terms of trying to ensure, because we want to really hear from the Green Party and what the Green Party's got to say. So I want to go, and I've got Alex Boston, I believe, is up for the next question. Alex, are you ready? Here we go.
Here I am. Alex Boston, Renewable Cities. So our fastest growing source of GHG since 1990 is transportation, bigger than oil and gas, risen 80%. Our vehicle stock is growing at more than 2 times the rate of our population. Our biggest transit investments are not shifting people out of their cars. They're rolling through forests and fields, and they're facilitating low density development. We need to focus growth and integrate it with transit. How are you, when you are elected, what is your commitment going to be to work with your party to strengthen infrastructure policy to make sure that our public transit investments really count?
Okay, Alex, that probably was the fastest having to ask that question in such fast time. So land use, this is a question of integration and land use planning with transportation investments. This time we are going to go to Anjali, we're going to go to Imtiaz, and then Josh. Go ahead, Anjali. Yes, just go right into it.
All right. So I think what's really important to consider is that land use planning has to, well, I do think actually that it does have to do a lot with building car-free or less car-dependent communities. And so having, it's very linked in that sense to housing, and having a prioritization on densification, having walkable communities that an expanded public transit network could actually service better, and having people be able to rely on a more localized community through the integration of an affordable housing plan with a climate aware land use planning strategy.
Thank you. Imtiaz, over to you. And Imtiaz, if we can't hear you, I'm going to suggest turning off the video.
Yeah,
so we can hear you.
so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my biggest concern right now with the SkyTrain development on Broadway is that it's going to cause more congestion, and it's going to create a bottleneck of transit going that way. And the biggest concern, I live like 2 blocks away from the Broadway SkyTrain, and the concern is how it's going to displace the people living along the corridor, right? The rent's going to go up, and in terms of land use and transportation, I don't think it's very effective. The SkyTrain stations are far apart. And why is it that we have SkyTrain above ground in the east part of Vancouver, and then we have to go underground in the west part of Vancouver, and it's causing a lot of problems for the other merchants along Broadway. So that's a big concern. I think we need to have more people involvement in how we make decisions about transportation and how it affects mobility around people who live around there, and in terms of affordability of people who live around transit. That's a big issue.
Thanks, Imtiaz. Over to you, Josh.
Critical insight in the question, because almost a quarter of our emissions do come from transportation, as you note, the importance of transportation when it comes to emissions. That's why the Liberals launched our plan for rebates for electric vehicles, and that we're going to phase out all light duty cars and passenger truck sales to zero by 2035. On land use, I mean, it's top of my mind, and and I appreciate the question of what will I do to work with my party. What I can really do, my biggest value is to be present and seen. It's not so obvious on Zoom, but I was born without arms and legs. I'm an electric wheelchair user. And so accessibility has to be at the core of everything that we do. And that means, a lot of times individual vehicles are not accessible. So one way around that is to design so that they're not needed.
Thanks so much, Josh. Area Finley asks a question: how do each of the parties intend to ensure that any transportation expansion will not involve investing in coal and gas? And I'm going to ask Imtiaz, Annalee, and Josh to go in that order.
No, I mean, we're the Green Party. We believe in renewable resources. That's a core. So investing on coal and gas, natural gas maybe, but LNG, we were completely against it. Very disappointed that Jagmeet Singh will not oppose fracking. We're very clear on that. So we need renewable resources. I mean, the slavers across the way here, they're investing in solar, they're investing in wind energy, and traditionally people used to have windmills and it was natural. So why are we investing so much on fossil fuels? I think that's the wrong way to go. Thank you.
Okay, Anjali and then Josh.
What the NDP is laying out is actually very much in line with what need to be our climate targets, in line with the current climate science. And so that involves cutting off subsidies, about $18 billion in subsidies that have been awarded to oil and gas exploration, production, refining, and transportation in 2020 alone, and reinvesting that back in public transit. And as I mentioned before, with the plan to convert all government transport, all public transit to electric by 2030. So it's that cutting off the handouts to the oil and gas industry and reinvesting it back in transportation.
Okay. Josh, how are we? Yep.
Oh.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to restate the question.
Go ahead. Why not restate it for all of us? Then
Okay, so I think the question was, how are you going to make sure that you're not reinvesting in oil and gas or coal in the transportation infrastructure?
So I'm proud that the Liberal approach is rooted in being the only credible approach in this election. It's the only choice on climate change out of any of the parties. It's received the top marks by the independent climatologists and scientists and experts and economists. Andrew Weaver, the past leader of the BC Green Party, has endorsed our plan and has voted for the federal Liberals. And so that is to create green jobs, get to net zero emissions by 2050, end plastic waste by 2030, and to protect more of our nature, especially Fairy Creek, which is just on the top of all of our minds. We're investing $50 million to try and come to a solution with the BC NDP on the devastation that's occurring in our old growth forests.
Okay. There is a question from David and Ruth Grigg, and the question is really about that mixing between handing out to cities or municipalities. They might call it, does each candidate think the current process of handing out goodies to local transit is appropriate compared with funding a pan-Canadian transportation infrastructure? This time I'm going to Josh, to Anjali, and then to Imtiaz.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd spend a lot of time thinking about that because I see that a lot of the struggles in my riding, Vancouver East, can be boiled down to the inability of the different levels of government to work together. And so I believe strongly that leadership is all about holding competing views in your mind at the same time and being able to find a pathway forward, even in the face of that. So I think ultimately the answer to your question is that
Sorry, I'm going to ask our technician if maybe we've got.
I think that was just
one, two.
Imtiaz I was getting.
Yeah, so we've got two Imtiazes on. We can only have one, or we're going to get an echo. Sorry, Josh, back to you.
So I'll just wrap up here by saying that the answer is that we need to likely do both, and we need to do it in a way that doesn't lose track of leadership. And so in wrestling with the different levels of government, in wrestling with pan-Canadian versus local, we have to confront all sorts of things like Monsieur Blanchette, who says that, you know, Canadian norms are not better than Quebec norms. And that's tough for me to handle. I'd love to speak with them about it, but I can't access the subways in Montreal. So they're not wheelchair accessible, and they could use a lot more Vancouver norms.
Great. Angeli, over to you.
I have to agree with Josh there that I think it's so critical for all levels of government to work together on something as basic and important as public infrastructure for transportation. And I don't think it's so much a matter of handing out goodies as it is a matter of investing in local communities, where local governments are really tapped into the needs of their communities and in the various sort of like different needs across their regions. And so I agree that we need both. We need a centralized commitment, a federal commitment for low carbon free public transit, which the NDP has committed to, but we also need the federal government to be a really strong partner for municipalities, because municipalities are really tapped into their communities and they need that support.
Great, thank you. Imtiaz, over to you.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we are in agreement. But as I said in my opening, that it's really, really important to include Indigenous governance in all our processes, and that we do that. So I would like to, if I was a member of Parliament, I would call for a summit that includes all governments, including Indigenous governments and municipal governments, where we can talk about transportation and land use. And I think it's really critical that we work together on that. I know when you go down to Musqueam, you see that they really don't have much of support in terms of transportation or infrastructure and things like that. And we need to change that. We need to bring better transit and better housing and mobility for people who live both in the urban centers and outside of that as well, for all people who live in this metro region. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all candidates. That was the Face the Public round. Now I'm going to take you through a bit where you've now got another opportunity to ask questions of the candidates. So this is Candidate Challenge Round 2, and we're starting with Angeli asking Imtiaz a question, and it's 30 seconds to ask the question, 1 minute Imtiaz to answer, and go Angeli.
Okay, question to Imtiaz. I would say that the Greens are, sort of tout themselves as having like the strongest climate policies and the strongest stance on the environment. I would just, I guess, pose the question, what's one thing that the party wanted to get done for the environment but couldn't because you didn't form government? And also, could you comment on your stance around natural gas? Because you mentioned that natural gas might be okay, but not LNG. So,
Okay.
Sorry, not LNG in BC. So just wondering what the clarification is there.
Imtiaz, one thing, and natural gas.
Okay, well, yeah, sure, because there's multiple questions there. Yeah, I know natural gas is natural. I mean, it's there. And the problem is then when we try to liquefy it, that's when we get liquid. That's the problem. And that's where fracking happens. And it's disappointing that Jagmeet Singh is supporting the Coastal GasLink pipeline and will not oppose fracking. I think, if you look at the Green Party policy, it's the best in terms of environment. We really need to stop fossil fuels, including, LNG and others as well. So I think it's really important that we do that.
Okay, going to open this up. So we're talking about natural gas, we're talking about fracking, pipelines, anything in terms of that you want to relate to that. Go ahead.
So the Green Party platform being the best platform for the environment, but that's not what the independent experts are saying. They're saying that the Liberal plan is head and shoulders better.
Independent expert, maybe the one that maybe handpicked. but independent experts are saying ours is the best one. So it depends on which independent experts you look at. Of course, Mr. Trudeau will quote an independent expert that they've hired. So it's it's not independent when you hire someone to do rating your plan, right?
Andrew Weaver.
I saw Angela coming in there. Just unmute yourself, Angela, and come right in.
Oh yeah, I think I would just add to that I mean there's been an independent expert who rated the parties and got a lot more airtime than his rankings deserved in the last week, Mark Jackard. And the premise of his argument is something that I think anybody who really cares about a climate safe future and actual science-based targets would reject, because his he was worried about growing the economy through fossil fuel infrastructure and through the fossil fuel industry, rather than sunsetting the fossil fuel industry and making a very necessary public investment in transitioning all workers into the green economy. And so I think that was a really flawed argument that has been debunked multiple times, and yet I see the Liberal sort of communication continuing to swirl around that and uphold that. So I just want to point that out.
And Elizabeth May has famously confirmed over the years that we can never achieve our climate goals while tanking the economy. It's not an either or choice, and the key to growing the economy is sophistication on the environment.
I would
And also,
tanking
if I
the
may,
economy from stopping the fossil fuel industry. I don't think that's one and the same thing. I think tanking the economy is to invest in the fossil fuel industry. It's a very short term.
Woo!
Can I get in a word?
Juice
Can I
in
get in
that
a word?
one? No,
Just-
because MTS, no, you can't get in a word because time's up on this one, but you are on now and you get to ask the NDP a question. So you do get to speak, but with a 30-second question for Anjali. So over to
Okay.
you, MTS.
Anjali, the same question to you is that what do you plan to do for renters in terms of grants for renters and so on? There's a lot of things around homeowners, and even if you look at all the party policies, but even for seniors, it's about home ownership. What about renters? What can you do for renters in terms of grants?
I think there's a real shared understanding amongst all of us that we desperately need to stop this runaway housing crisis that we find ourselves in. And so there are several solutions that the NDP has put forward. There's supply side solution, which is building 500,000 new homes that are made up of a mix of affordable housing and cooperative housing and public housing, as well as market rate housing. And that is a support to people like me who are renters across this region. It is a support to have an influx, a good supply of affordable housing that is being committed to and invested in by the federal government. And then on the demand side, we have to stop the reckless speculation and flipping and sort of empty home activities that are happening
Again,
that are currently legal.
Anjali, I'm talking about renters again. We're not answering the question, and also,
Yeah.
I mean, and grants for renters.
Right. And I
Okay, so
think
we've
that
got this as an open section, so go ahead. Let's hear
curbing
it.
the housing market is in the interest of renters. It's the fundamental thing that's in the interest of renters. And the NDP has expressed support for income support, such as the UBI, but not as a root cause solution, as a solution to give people the supports they need in the meantime, while meaningful investments are made to actually address the root of the issue, which is a runaway housing market.
Okay, you use
Right,
the
but
term
you have no
UBI.
grant-
You use the
what about
term UBI.
grants for-
Can you tell us what that means? Just so that everybody is clear, UBI.
My apologies. UBI is,
Universal guaranteed income,
yes,
Or basic
universal
income.
basic income.
basic
Okay,
income.
okay.
Yeah, again, there's all these investments and things like that go to landlords, but there's no supports for renters. What about grants? Would you bring in grants for improving our appliances or improving, like we had a heat wave, right? A dome, and it was, so how can renters survive? If landlords don't support us, how can renters get help in terms of benefiting ourselves? Thank you.
I absolutely think that as part of a very necessary climate emergency plan that the federal government and all levels of government need to implement, in the coming years, and the City of Vancouver has already put forward such a plan. We do need a variety of measures to support people in the short term while we have the broader infrastructure changes that we also really need. And so I'm very much in support of developing those short-term measures. So a UBI is one of them, rental supports is another one of them, and an immediate supply of affordable housing is another one.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to close the challenge number 2, and we're going to go now to dig into a little bit of your party platforms. And this is where I get to ask you some, I think we'll call them hard-hitting questions. I'm not sure, but I'm going to start with you, Josh, and we're going to focus in on the Liberals platform. Okay, so in its platform, the Liberal Party is committed to $4 billion in a new housing accelerator fund to build 100,000 new middle-class homes by 2024. The fund, as we understand it, is to support municipalities that tackle NIMBYism, not in my backyard ism, and encourage transit-oriented development. I'd like to know how your party is defining the middle-class homes, and how will your party also address the issues of homelessness or near homelessness? Over to you, Josh.
Thank you. If I can find the unmute button here. I'll start with our plan to end chronic homelessness, because we announced that in 2017. Sorry, how long do I have here? 1 minute?
I'm going to give you 2 minutes on this one.
Okay. So in 2017, we announced that we would reduce chronic homelessness by 50% through 1,200 projects across the country. We're committed to appointing a new federal housing advocate within the first 100 days of our mandate. One of the mandates of the advocate will be to end chronic homelessness by 50%. The middle class definition, listen, leadership is about admitting when you don't actually know the answer here, Shauna. So I'm not entirely sure what the exact definition of middle class is. I will say that it'll be critical to the success of the goal to define it. And so I would make sure to have it defined if it's not defined already in the plan, and to make sure that the definition is communicated. A few thoughts on NIMBYism here. I live in Mount Pleasant, as I mentioned, and we have a condo that's attached to the Biltmore single residence occupancy SRO. It helps with the addiction crisis, and a new hotel was just purchased on the other side down the street, the Best Western. And I was disappointed to see a lot of my neighbors opposing that. Personally, I don't oppose it. And the key to success in using housing to confront the other systemic issues that we're facing, like transportation, like addiction, is to make sure that the approach is mixed.
Thanks, Josh. And I noticed Svengali is suggesting going to that issue of affordability on 30% of income for housing. And that is, I think, for a number of federal agencies, what they use to determine affordability. Whether that's middle class or not, I'm not sure, but that's one of the things that Svengali has suggested. Okay, I'm going to go now to Anjali. In its platform, the New Democrats state that public transit should be convenient and affordable while taking cars off the road, cutting emissions, and reducing gridlock. What specific measures or investments would an NDP government make in public transit and active transportation? And would you increase, reduce, or supplement the $14.9 billion permanent transit fund set up in early 2021?
Thanks for the question. The NDP platform is as part of a broader strategy to help people have healthier and more resilient communities. Public transportation is a huge piece of that. And so to reduce the gridlock. It's so important to, first of all, modernize public transit and make the vehicles more efficient, and there's a commitment there. There's a commitment to develop a public intercity bus system to replace, the Greyhound was like the company shut down last year, and so that left a big need to have a public intercity bus system that's affordable and accessible to people. And the NDP is also committing to support the creation of high frequency rail infrastructure, because we really do need that across the country as a form of low carbon and highly efficient transportation. And the platform also commits to promoting smart community planning and active transportation like walking and cycling. And so promoting things like multi-use trails and that kind of infrastructure that helps communities get less dependent on cars. And in terms of the investment, I would just reiterate the investment that's been promised to municipalities, where we think it'll be most efficiently used, doubling the investment from 2.2 billion to 4.4 billion.
And in terms of, I just want to come back because there's a $14.9 billion transit infrastructure fund. Where does that fit within your policy platform?
I believe that's part of doubling the money to municipalities. I don't know exactly of the exact relationship between what that municipal investment and that particular fund would look like. And that is something that I can follow up on.
Okay, Angela, I'm one more question to follow up on just what you've mentioned. The intercity bus, where is that an investment to municipalities, or is that something the federal government would do as an
That's a
investment?
federal commitment.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Imtiaz, your turn. The Green Party. In its platform, the Green Party states that their party will develop a national transportation strategy that will be zero carbon public ground transport throughout Canada by 2040. The Green Party also wants to exempt new and used zero emission vehicles from the federal sales tax while creating a national cycling and walking infrastructure fund. You also support a fuel vehicle ban by 2030. So first question is, zero emission vehicles still contribute to congestion? What incentives will a green government bring in to support switching to active transportation and public transit? And what would the Green Party do to turn over the existing fleet of fuel vehicles purchased up until 2029? So both questions.
Well, those are bold targets, right? And there are targets again, but we need to be ambitious, and there obviously has to be a transition. And we need to transition towards, a fossil fuel-less transportation system, and I think we're committed to that. Yeah. So, and as Annamie Paul said, that the Green Party is not about power. We want to work across party lines and come up with solutions. So this is our proposal, and these are our targets, and we need to be flexible in terms of transition. But we need to make those targets, and we have to try to reach them.
Imtiaz, I'm not sure you're answering my question around if you increase, well, you can have zero emission vehicles, but it's still congestion on our roads.
No, that's what I'm talking about. We need to have a transition between transitioning those vehicles from zero emission vehicles. I mean, yeah, but we need to transition to transit as well,
Okay.
right? We're proposing, that's what I meant. What we're proposing is we need to have, free transit. And we need to have more usable transit. The city tore up its train tracks and streetcar tracks to sell cars. Now we gridlock and things like that. So we need to bring back the streetcars, and we need to use other technologies like fuel cell, other than electricity and so on. We need to combine them, but we need to be more innovative in using technology to move us around.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a question for all of you. Now, carbon is one of the four really important areas for moving in a livable region. We talk about transportation and land use planning through the lens of health, resilience, and carbon, looking at the issues around climate. We look at economic development, and we look at equity. So this question is for all of you. In early 2021, Canada updated its new emissions reduction commitments. It's what's called the nationally determined contributions. as per our international agreements. The new target is 40 to 45% emission reductions below 2005 levels by 2030. It's a lot of numbers. So 40 to 50% emission reductions below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, experts across the country say this doesn't go far enough.
Yes.
And Canada needs a 60% target to meet our fair share obligations under the Paris Agreement. Cities are key players in building, managing infrastructure, and leading the fight against climate change. And they've often been at the forefront of Canada's response thus far through mobility and land use. How will your party work with cities to exceed our emission reduction targets and achieve our fair share contribution? Imtiaz, I'm going to go to you first because I heard you said yes. Let's hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you so much. I mean, we just had the UN Code Red report that is already too late. And yes, our target is 60%. And I think we need anything less is we cannot slow down the climate change. And so we need to really be efficient and things like that. And as I said earlier, Anna-May Paul, myself, we believe in working in partnership with governments, including Indigenous governments, municipal governments, and so on. So we need to work together to reach those targets. And I think it's really, really important to do that. Anything less is really futile. And that's why we don't need NLNG. We don't need fracking. We need to bring down those targets as much as possible because we're in a climate emergency, frankly.
Okay.
It's Code Red.
Okay, so Anjali, what's your party going to do to work with cities to bring those targets to a different place than they are?
I absolutely agree that we need to exceed those targets to even have a sort of modest chance to stay below some of the modeling that the IPCC has put out around the climate. It is a code red for humanity, and we do need to act like it is an emergency. And so cities carry so much power here because, in Vancouver, 54% of our carbon emissions come from burning gas in buildings, and 39% come from vehicles. And those are two things that municipalities have a lot of power over. So I think this comes down to having a strong collaboration between all levels of government in terms of land use. And that needs to be integrated with an affordable housing strategy so that land use is taking place within the constraints of these stronger targets, and that it's prioritizing efficient buildings so that we don't have to retrofit later on and incur these huge costs later down the road to retrofit buildings. And we need to so that involves densification, and it involves land use planning decisions that are not about urban sprawl, but more about urban densification. And reducing our dependence on cars. So this is really where a climate emergency plan would be needed to link transportation, land use, and affordable housing.
Thank you. Over to you, Josh.
So when I think about targets, my mind always gets captured by an analogy. I hope you'll indulge me. I'm getting to the answer here, but it's all about compliance. So it's like trying to lose weight. If you choose a protocol that you can't comply with, like eating, half a salad a day, then you're just going to abandon ship and not do anything. So it's not necessarily about political will. We have the political will. We have near universal consensus. What this is about is striking the delicate balance to make sure that the targets are complied with. And so what we're doing at the Liberal Party is that we're working with experts to make it to our 2050 net zero goal that's been enshrined in law. And we have 5-year targets to stay on track. And those are based on the advice of the Net Zero Advisory Body. And so, of course, all of our nationwide initiatives, price on pollution, subsidizing green vehicles, investing in transportation, involve cities. Protecting, old growth forest is, I suppose, outside of the city, but the city is impacted by that. So it's all about making sure that the targets are aggressive enough so that we and realistic enough that we will comply with them. And I'll just use the last 30 seconds here to share one of the more captivating areas that captivates my thinking in climate change, which is, I believe it's called the Kyoto principle. I might be wrong on that, but it sets out 4 levers that are available to influence the greenhouse effect. So you can reduce population, you can reduce per GDP production, you can reduce overall energy expenditure, or you can reduce carbon intensity. And population and economic indicators are less attractive.
Okay. One last question for each of you, and that this is one of the parts of our community at MLR is the trucking industry. The trucking industry is challenged with the lack of the technology to make the transitions to zero emission vehicles. So how are you going to work with the trucking industry to ensure that the technology is there to support the switch? I'm going to begin with you, Angelique, go over to Josh, and then come back to you, MTS. Angelique.
Sorry, just to clarify, did you mean the technology to help the trucking industry reduce emissions?
That's right, to move to zero emission vehicles. The technology does not yet exist according to our friends in the trucking industry. They can't do it yet. So there's a gap there. So what are you going to do as part of government to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think that's a really huge issue because the trucking industry is so big and it's so critical to our economy. And I think it involves this holistic approach of investing in strong infrastructure for other modes of transportation, like the high frequency rail that I spoke about, not just for passengers, but for industry as well. And I think that the increased investment to municipalities for the purposes of electrifying government transport should also be expanded. And there currently are no plans for that, but it should also be expanded to the trucking industry. But I think it's really important to have other modes of infrastructure that are in place to be able to take the pressure off that industry.
MTS.
Yeah, I think that the big issue is diesel, and the trucking industry uses very much diesel. We have the technology and opportunity to invest in other options such as ethanol and of course fuel cell. I mean, there's been a lot of research done here in BC, in Burnaby, around fuel cell technology, which uses hydrogen, emits water on the other side. Even you have in airplane engines, they can be used. That's an option as well. I'm not stuck on, I like that as an option, but I think that it is an option. Ethanol is another option. Electricity, but I don't think we should be banking on electricity, because then of course, we're going to build more Site C dams. We don't need to build that Site C dam and so on. So there are many other modes of technologies we can use. Also the technologies, we don't need to make such heavy trucks anymore, right? We can use lighter trucks and so on. And of course, rail, as Anjali said, I think we need to invest. All the money that's going into improving rail is going to the east. I am not seeing any of it here for passenger or for industry. I used to be able to take a train to Calgary. We can't do that anymore. And BC Rail needs more money because as you know, Greyhound's going under. So we need to really invest in other modes of transportation that are not using so much fossil fuels, and use other alternatives so we can bring down those gas emissions and meet our targets.
Thank you. Over to you, Josh.
We have 2 really strong prongs in our plan to address this. It's critical. This is under the reduction of carbon intensity and also likely just overall energy intensity that I was talking about earlier. And the first prong to address the trucking industry specifically is that we will develop an investment tax credit of up to 30% for the development of a range of clean technologies. And the second prong that will be of interest to the trucking industry is a direct investment of $200 million to retrofit large trucks that are currently on the road. And so that's to cut pollution now.
Thanks so much for the response in terms of giving some specifics there. I want to now move to the next part, which is the candidate challenge number 3. And Angeli, you're going to have a chance to ask Josh a question now. So over to you, 30 seconds for your question, 1 minute, Josh, for answer, and then we'll open it up for 2. Angeli.
Okay. Josh, you mentioned that according to independent experts, the Liberals have the strongest climate plan. And first of all, I would add that the climate plan is only for 40% emissions reductions by 2050, which isn't in line with the science, and they haven't reached that yet. And so so the NDP has planned to put a price on pollution and ban single-use plastics as well. So that's something that that's sort of the baseline at this point, but also on
Angela,
top
your
of that,
question,
also
please.
fossil fuel subsidies. So I just wanted to ask you to speak to something that the party wanted to get done in the past 6 years, but couldn't because you lacked a majority.
Okay, Josh, on.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, thanks for raising the discussion about the environment there. I mean, independent experts and the fact that the NDP's plan is very similar to the Liberals. The NDP agrees with most Liberal proposals and takes credit for most Liberal successes, refuses to be involved with any failures. I think that the government-wide failure, it's not a partisan failure. Everyone is talking about the failure and the shame of the long-term water advisories for Indigenous peoples across the country. And so, this is such a complex issue. And I think all of government, all of Parliament needs to take credit for this, for not reaching those goals. So you're either in opposition or not to contribute.
So in response, Josh is saying the one thing is the water, the cleanliness of the water, and he sees it. Okay, so opening it up to any of you on that issue. Go MTS.
So Josh, thanks for saying that the NDP proposal is quite similar to yours, and I agree. It's not enough to meet the climate targets. We have an emergency that's going on, but the fact is that the Liberals have not met any of those targets that they make. I have to remind you that Andrew Weaver is no longer a Green. He's a former Green. He's now a Liberal. So don't tout that as a Green thing, and maybe that's your only saving grace. But no, it doesn't work. The targets are not good enough. It's not going to meet the targets, or you haven't met the targets. Every year you miss the targets, and also in terms of the targets that are laid, both with the NDP and the Liberals, they're not good enough. We need to be more aggressive if we're going to slow down climate change, and we need to reduce those gas emissions.
Yeah, I was touting him as the former leader, so sorry, I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I'm also very proud to have 2 past BC Green local candidates in Vancouver East endorsing me.
I just also wanted to clarify on that point about the platforms being similar. I was actually saying that they're not similar, but that the one thing that the Liberals point to as a strong point of their platform is carbon pricing. And I would point out that the NDP platform has carbon pricing as the very baseline upon which the other commitments are built from. So I just want to point out that really key difference. And also it's true, the independent expert analysis that you're referring to is sort of basically taking the approach that, if you set yourself a really, really, really small incremental weak goal, you're going to look a lot better when you achieve it. But it doesn't look good when you set yourself a very small incremental weak goal and then you don't achieve that at all. So I think that's what I think MTS and I are pointing out about the Trudeau record on climate change.
Okay, this is the last of the candidate challenges. I am looking at the chat. There are some exceptional questions now coming in from participants. So don't know that we'll get to them with our time, but I just want you to be conscious of them, looking at what residents are asking about what your platforms are saying. So Josh, you get to ask MTS a question.
Thanks, Imtiaz. Like most Canadians, I think I was really struck by Annemie Paul's performance in the debate. She was incredible. And unfortunately, she had to crawl over broken glass to get there. And the Green Party seems to be in shambles. So what are you personally doing to help the party, get its head above water again?
No, I thank you. I think thank you for saying that. I think May was great, and it's really bringing the party together. So it seems to be in shambles, but really not in shambles. I mean, and the fact is that this was a snap election, and we weren't ready for it, right? And it was really, really difficult. There was a story about me not getting enough sufficient signatures. I mean, for an unknown, it is a challenge, but I wasn't having a difficulty. So that was a misnomer. Here I am. I'm making a difference. I'm running as a Green, as a social justice activist, and I'm making a difference. And we have some incredible candidates that are running, bringing the party together. And everywhere I go, people saying, "Oh yeah, I'm voting Green because we're the real deal." Thank you.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to go in on that? No. I am going to, because I'm going to do one question from the audience before we go to closing statements. And this is from the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition, which is one of the members of MLR. And this is to all the candidates. What are your party's top 3 commitments to improve lower mainland transit and transportation of goods during your first year if you form government? I'm going to start with Josh, go to Anjali, and then Imtiaz. Josh, top line in the first year for Metro Vancouver transportation.
Right. So, you know what? Let me find the answer here.
I'm going to ask Josh. I'm going to ask you. Let's hear from you.
Sure. I mean, the question is about the party. So, listen, we all have to be realistic that we're in parties here and that we have to use our own leadership in order to engage with our parties. And that's the main value that I'm bringing Vancouver East, is that I can be a much more effective conduit to Vancouver East than the opposition, than the NDP, to have a seat at the table to get off of the sidelines. And so the investment in the Broadway subway is going to continue. That's top of mind. The green incentives for electric vehicles are going to continue. And the overall transportation support is going to continue, and I'm going to contribute as much as I can to bring the levels of government together.
Thanks so much, Josh. Over to you, Anjali.
Yeah, so in the first year of getting into office, there would be a commitment, as I mentioned, to doubling our investment in municipalities to switch all government transport to zero emissions vehicles, which is really important to cutting down on emissions. Also to set up a permanent funding mechanism for modern public transit across Canada for the long run, which will really help in getting people out of cars and cars off the road and reducing emissions, and free public transit for all.
Okay. MTS, your parties.
Well, again, you said you want our position because, with Josh's position is the party represents you to us, and we're supposed to represent us. 1 year is a very short time, right, in terms of getting things done and so on. But if you want to get things done, you need to have buy-in from industry, from public, and so on. So we really need to work together and work with industry, have summits, and talk about how can we improve our technology and use to move to renewable energy sources and so on, whether it's trucks, whether it's rail, and so on. But we need to do that very quickly. We can impose things on the industry and public but we cannot get them to do it unless we have a buy-in and we work in partnership with them. And as I said earlier on, we need to include Indigenous governments in this process as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're at closing statements now. We've had a lot of chance to talk about a whole range of issues. I'm going to ask you to be as succinct as you can. If you do it in 1 minute, great. You have up to 2, but I would love to see if you could do it in 1. We're going to start with closing statements. Josh, Anjali, and Imtiaz. Over to you, Josh. Closing statement.
Thanks, Shauna. Thanks for such a great discussion today. I mean, I'm hearing from a lot of voters at the doors about how much anxiety and how aversion they felt when they watched the leaders debate. And you said that you're gonna channel Chachi Curl. I don't think you did, because I don't think I felt the same anxiety in this discussion. It was a really good one, and I really enjoyed it. I'm in politics to live out one of my favorite quotes from past president of the US, Eisenhower. He says, if a problem is too big to solve, then expand it. And that's really why I'm here, because I haven't been able to get onto buses or into taxis across the country. I haven't been able to get into stores. And the only way that I can achieve the inclusive society that I know I deserve is by achieving it for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Over to you, Anjali.
Yes, I also want to echo thanks to the organizers, and thank you so much, Shauna, for your respectful and warm way of guiding us through this conversation. It's been great to engage with you, Imtiaz and Josh. There's a lot to dig into there, but this is why I entered politics, is because I believe that we can do it differently, and we can do it with respect and with, really challenging each other, but understanding that we do need to work across all lines at the end of the day. And also recognizing that these issues are so interconnected and so complex, and they're all taking place on stolen lands. And so that needs to be a deep part of any of this work and this decision making going forward. So thank you so much for having me here. And looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much. Imtiaz, it's so good to hear your voice clearly.
Thank you. I switched over. I thought it was going to work, but thank you so much. I mean, this is such a great opportunity for having this debate, and I'm so grateful to be part of that. I think we have a few more days. Today's last day for advanced voting. A reminder for special ballots, you have until tomorrow to 6 to do that. Critically important issues, and Josh, you raised some important issues. I know my mother has uses Handy Dart, and that's been a challenge and so on, because you need to go and buy fare savers, and you need to go and buy taxi savers where it's not accessible and so on. So we need to improve those things like that for everyone, so it is more inclusive, and we need to talk more about that. I think that we have to keep promises that we don't make promises that you can't keep. Keep the targets that you promise, right? And that's what we're seeing in this election. We want another mandate of a government that did not keep the promises. And now they want another mandate. So remember that. I'm a therapeutic counselor. I'm a listener. And I think I could be a good MP to listen to you, to be a good caseworker. And beyond this election, I think we should touch base and work across party lines to carry on this work that we've started today. And thank you very much.
Big thank you to each of you for running. I just want to say that. I know what it's like. It's a lot of work. I'm going to pass it over to Jude to get us closing. Over to you, Jude.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Thank you, everyone, to all the candidates, to everyone for being here. We would like to thank our funders, the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia, the North Growth Foundation, the Aqueduct Foundation, and all of our MLR stakeholders who have supported us thus far. Quick information about voting. As was mentioned, advanced voting closes today, September 13th at 9 p.m. You can find all information on elections.ca. Mail-in ballot request deadline is tomorrow, September 14th at 6 p.m. local time. You can vote at any Elections Canada office before Election Day. The deadline for that is tomorrow, September 14th at 6 p.m. local. in case folks don't know, after coming here, general election day is September 20th. You can vote at the polling station provided on your voter information card. For more options to vote, visit www.elections.ca. Once again, thank you everybody for coming out here. Thank you to all of our candidates for agreeing to be here. And we hope to see you, well, not again next year if there's another federal election, but at another type of public event coming up soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for
And
having
thank
us.
you so much, Vancouver Sun, for live streaming us, and Harold Monroe for being our media partner today. And thank you, Jude, for everything. Jonas as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Bus stop where day she's there, I say, please share my umbrella. Bus stop, bus go, she stays, love grows under my umbrella. All that summer we enjoyed it, wind and rain and shine. That umbrella we employed it, by August she was mine. Every morning I would see her waiting at the stop. Sometimes she'd shop and she would
Big thanks to our closed captioners. Clara, thanks for all your support today.
all the people stared as if we were both quite insane. Someday my name and hers are
And Fergus, thank you for your fabulous chat, Captain.